This video is going to walk through an example of how to conduct a chi-square test using JASP. Specifically, we'll be conducting a chi-square test of independence. This video goes along with Chapter 9 of our text, Applied Data Analysis in Psychology, Exploring Diversity with Statistics. The data set for this exercise comes from a study by Rodriguez et al., where they were interested in barriers that immigrants might face when they come to the United States. In this study, they were specifically focused on barriers around healthcare, and they sampled participants who'd visited an emergency department. They were interested in both legal citizens and undocumented immigrants who were Latino or Latinx in their ethnicity. These participants were interviewed by physicians, students, and other research assistants, and they were asked questions on several concepts, including their citizenship status, their awareness of immigration-related statements in the media, whether they felt safe in the United States, and whether they specifically felt safe coming to the emergency department. We're going to use a chi-square test of independence to see if their citizenship status is associated with whether they felt safe seeking medical services from an emergency department. So our basic hypotheses that we're going to test here is that there is an association between citizenship status and whether someone feels safe or unsafe coming to the emergency room. So the null hypothesis would be that there's no association, and the alternative would be that there is an association. And mathematically, what's going on is we're comparing the observed frequencies to what would be expected if there were no relationship between these variables. The specific JASP skills that we'll learn are how to check your assumptions of a chi-square test, which is really only one main assumption of making sure your expected counts are greater than 5. We'll conduct the chi-square test of independence, and we'll interpret the associated output. We'll also work on how to compute an odds ratio that can be included in addition to an effect size to show a little bit more context on the direction of your relationship, such as, in this case, what's the odds of feeling unsafe if you are an immigrant or an illegal immigrant compared to a Latino citizen. Here I have the JASP file open that we'll use for this particular analysis. This includes information on the participants that were involved, as well as the responses that they had for their ethnicity, their citizenship status, whether they knew information like knowing the current president, hearing immigration-related statements in the media, and whether they felt unsafe in the U.S. and unsafe going to the emergency department or the emergency room. You'll see in my version of the file, I've already added labels to my nominal variables so that it shows the actual variable label instead of a number. If you've opened a CSV version or another version of this data, you simply click on the variables and you can add those labels here. If yours are listed as 0 or 1, you can add those labels, and this is detailed in the textbook at the start of this particular walkthrough. Now, before we get into our actual analysis, we want our data to reflect the participants that are most important to our research question. And so we're going to use some filters to make sure we're focusing on Latinx participants that are familiar with some statements around immigration, because if they aren't familiar in some statements around immigration, this might be a different subset that may be less affected. So we want to focus on those who are familiar with some of the statements that have been going on in the media at this time. So to do this filter, we're going to click first on our Latino variable, and we're going to filter out those who said no. So we're going to focus just on our Latina participants. And then for no president, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to filter out those who said no. So we're only focusing on people who knew the president at the time. And then in terms of heard statements in the media, we're going to again filter out those who said no. We want to focus on just those who were familiar with what was going on in the media at the time that these data were collected. Now, the main assumptions for a chi-square test of independence are first that you're looking at categorical variables. In this example, we do have categorical variables of citizenship status where it's undocumented or legal, and we're focusing on this safety in the ER, so they either felt safe or they didn't feel safe. Since both of those are categorical, our assumption makes sense for our chi-square test. And we also assume we have independent observations with each participant belonging to a specific cell. For instance, we have legal citizens that feel unsafe or safe, but they're not belonging to more than one category. The one that we actually test with the chi-square analysis with our data is to make sure that our expected counts are greater than 5. So to do this, we need to be able to go into our data and calculate expected frequencies. We're going to go to our frequencies menu here, and we're going to select the option for contingency tables. And these are just tables where variables frequencies are counted up for two variables in more of a matrix style. We're going to move over citizenship status to our row variable and unsafe in the ER to our column variable. It doesn't necessarily matter what you put where because we're not specifically labeling one as a predictor and an outcome. This is just how the data will be displayed with one in the rows and one in the columns. To check our assumption, we're going to go down to cells here, and we're going to request the expected counts to be shown. Looking at our output, we're going to see that this has provided a table where we have our observed frequencies, where it's labeled count. For instance, 418 legal citizens did not feel unsafe, and 19 said they did feel unsafe. And then our expected count is our comparison, and that's what the count would be if these two categorical variables were completely unrelated. And we see here that our expected counts are over 300, 59, 56, and 358. And so none of those are less than 5. So we meet our statistical assumption for no expected frequencies less than 5. We see that there's already a chi-square test run here, but we're going to add one more piece of information. Under statistics, we're going to request our effect size under the nominal category. Phi and Kramer's V are different effect size options, so those will tell us more about the magnitude of our effects. Going back now to our output, this is some pretty straightforward output that we're going to be working with here. We see in our chi-squared test table that follows our contingency table, and remember the contingency table just gives our actual frequency counts and our expected counts if there was no relationship, and the differences between those values are what's being compared to compute the chi-square value. The chi-square value here is 65.51, which represents a fairly large discrepancy. This is based on 852 participants, 1 degree of freedom, which is calculated as our number of row categories minus 1 times our number of column categories minus 1. Since we just had 2 categories for each of our variables, that's just 2 minus 1 times 2 minus 1, and that's where you get 1 degree of freedom. And our p-value is less than 0.001. It's very small, and it's specifically less than 0.05, and so that tells us that there is a significant association between our two variables. So there's a significant association between one's citizenship status and whether they feel safe going to the emergency room. Looking at our guidelines, which you have an image or summary table of in your book, we see that around 0.30 would be considered a medium effect, 0.1 would be considered a small effect, so our value of 0.28 almost meets the threshold of a medium effect. So we could say that the strength of this association is small to medium. The last way we can add some context to our findings is by calculating what's called an odds ratio. This helps us to know the odds of feeling unsafe if you're a legal citizen versus undocumented. And so to do this, we're actually going to calculate this by hand. I'm going to copy over I'm going to take away my expected counts, so I just have my very basic frequency counts in this table. And I'm going to copy this over to a document where we can look at it and calculate our odds ratio. To calculate the odds ratio, we're going to use the formula shown here, where we look at the likelihood of an outcome occurring in an interest group divided by the likelihood of an outcome occurring in the comparison group. This formula is the more basic form of the formula. There is another version of this where you're using multiplication, where this equation is reduced, that you can reference in your textbook as well. For this, we're going to be doing first A divided by B, where A represents the people in the group that we're interested in, which is the undocumented immigrants, where the outcome is present, meaning they feel unsafe. That's the outcome that we're interested in. And so if we try to figure out which group corresponds to that group A, we would look at the group that we're interested in, which is first undocumented citizens, and the number where the outcome is present of feeling unsafe, which is 97. So for A, this is going to be a value of 97. We're comparing that or putting that in the equation with participants in our interest group, undocumented immigrants, where the outcome is not present. They don't feel unsafe. And so of those who are undocumented, 318 did not feel unsafe going to the ER. So that's our number for group B. Group C and D are our comparison group. So for C, we're looking at the number of people in the group we're comparing to, the legal citizens, where the outcome is present. They felt unsafe. So we look at legal citizens and the number that felt unsafe, and that number is 19. Lastly, we're looking at group D. That's the number in the group we're comparing to, the legal citizens, where the outcome is not present. They didn't feel unsafe, and that value is going to be 418 participants. Putting that in the equation, we would work through this and we would see we're looking at 97 divided by 318 for our group of interest and 19 divided by 418 for our reference group. If we work through that, that would mean a 0.31 odds of feeling unsafe if you are undocumented and a 0.05 odds of feeling unsafe if you are legal. And we divide those odds by one another, we get 6.2. Now what that means is that undocumented immigrants are 6.20 times more likely or have a 6.20 greater odds of feeling unsafe when they visit the ER than legal citizens who are Latino or Latinx. That concludes the walkthrough for going through an example. You'll find in your ebook that there is a more detailed example of an APA style write-up and some additional references for similar tests when you have multiple categories and different references for effect sizes.